Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of Dark Academia Queen. Um, Today we're going to be talking about possibly one of my favorite cities that's on my travel bucket list. Now, it's known for Mardi Gras, but it also has a lot of haunted history, and it's also where Katrina came through. Excuse me. Can you guess what city I'm talking about? Well, if you guessed New Orleans, then you are correct. Now, there is so much haunted history in New Orleans that just draws me to really want to go there. It's known for its Mardi Gras, like I said, a lot. It is also a port town. And in 2005, Katrina affected the city that was seen in the show. Was city was seen in the Vampire Diaries, Legacies, the original. Even VC Andrews Ruby, for crying out loud. Now the city gets more than 10 million visitors a year, and it was once a $5.5 million industry at one point. Now, before I dive into the haunted history, let's talk a brief about the actual history of this fascinating town, port town. It was once also a literary hub at one point in the 1800s and is situated in the bend of the Mississippi within 100 miles from its mouth. And has been a chief city in Louisiana in the Gulf since the early 1700s. There was even a battle fought here that made Andrew Jackson a household name. Now, I could give you a long video about why I hate Andrew Jackson. I could, but that's not the purpose of this video, okay? But anyway, um, it was founded by the French and ruled for 40 years by the Spanish, and then bought by the U.S. in the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. Some significant battles of the War of 1812 the, and the Civil War was fought over the city, and over the last 100 years, the key struggles in New Orleans has been a social, both in poverty and racial strife, and natural, um, with hurricanes, floods, and sinking land. The first residents of New Orleans was 40 Native Americans of the woodland and Mississippians culture. The expeditions of DeSoto in 1542 and LaSalle in 1682 passed through the area. However, there were few permanent white settlers before 1718, and this was when the governor of French Louisiana, John Baptiste Le Moyne, founded the city of Nouvelle Orleans on the first crescent high ground above the Mississippi mouth, and it was 1772 when he would transfer Louisiana capital to Biloxi. Now, that same year, a hurricane would come through and destroy most of the new city, and it would also be rebuilt um, into the grip out of the French Quarter that we see today. Now, did you know that New Orleans carnival traditions have been centuries-old roots in French and Spanish Catholic, as well as African and Native American traditions? The oldest cruise that hosts New Orleans many Mardi Gras parades and balls were formed before 1860. However, but we know that Mobile, Alabama is actually home of the original Mardi Gras, and they still celebrate that. Now, oh, and fun fact, if you're hanging around, what state has similar history? What U.S. state has similar history to the U.S.? Um, in 1762, 1763, France signed treaties ceding Louisiana to Spain, and for 40 years, New Orleans was a Spanish city, trading heavily with Cuba and Mexico and adopting the Spanish racial rules that allow for class of free people of color. And the city was ravaged by fires in 1788 and 1794, and then rebuilt and with build in bricks with buildings in a cathedral that still stand today. In 1803, Louisiana reverted to the French, who sold it to the U.S. 20 days later. And the Louisiana Purchase, who sold it. In the final battle of the War of 1812 was fought in defense of New Orleans. Can we guess which one that was? That was when Colonel Andrew Jackson led a coalition of pirates, formerly enslaved Africans, and Tennessee volunteers to defeat the British forces outside the city in the Battle of New Orleans. And we know that was nobody actually won that battle, but it was because it was a stalemate, and Britain just wanted to cut their ties while they were ahead. But the battle did make Andrew Jackson a household name. The guy's a douchebag, if you ask me. But anyway, aside from my bias on Andrew Jackson, let's talk about why I love. Still talk about the fascinating history that follows New Orleans. Well, during the first half of the 19th century, New Orleans became the U.S. wealthiest and third largest cities. Its port ship um the produce of many of the nation's interior into the Caribbean, South America, and Europe. And thousands of enslaved were sold into markets, but it was a free black community thrived. Until 1930, the majority of the residents still spoke French. At the start of the Civil War, New Orleans was a major city in the Confederacy, but it was only a year until the Union troops, having captured its downriver defenses, took the city unopposed. And during the Reconstruction era, um, race became a point of potent political views as emancipated enslaved people and free people of color were brought into the political process, and with the 1870s rise of the White League and the KKK, forced out of it, and although the rise of railroads and or shipping on the Mississippi less essential, and then it had been New Orleans and remained a powerful and influential port. So by 1900, the city's streetcars were electrified, and New Orleans jazz was born in its clubs and dance halls, and the city began to grow. And new pump technologies drove ambition, draining the low-lying swamps located in between the city's Riverside Crescent and Lake Pontchartrain. And now levees and drainage canals meant that many residents could live below sea level. The hurricanes in 1909, 1915, 1947, and 1965 would damage the city, but never catastrophically until 2005. And after World War II, suburbanization and conflicts over the school's integration drew many white residents out of the city, leaving a core that was increasingly African American and impoverished. Despite these social changes, the city grew as a tourist attraction, in which hundreds and thousands of annual visitors are drawn to Mardi Gras to the culture, and had inspired the playwright by Tennessee Williams, trumpeter Louis Armstrong, and chef John Gulator. Now, New Orleans is the most haunted city in the U.S. This is a place where the dead refuse to rest. In fact, there is no solid ground to hold them. Famous for its practitioners of the mystical arts from voodoo queens to possessed vampires and Wiccans, New Orleans set the stage for a man of the Third Eye explorations. We can see really why I want to visit the city. You would think it's because of Mardi Gras. But according to my friend Gabby, Mardi Gras is just hot and sweaty, and then there's like hurricane season, which is not the best time to go. But I've been told the best time to go is like between Mardi Gras and all of that. Now, it's also been a popular backdrop for cult themed films and TV shows. From True Bloods and interviews with a vampire to American Horror Story Coven, the proliferation and popularity of walking tours cast through all cities. So, let's talk about New Orleans and its ghostly history. Now, look, I am a believer in ghosts. I know some people are gonna look at me like I've lost my mind, like I'm crazy, but I believe that they're ghosts. Honestly, I would buy a haunted house, um, or a house that someone's died in, and be like, me and that ghost can just live for free. You know what I'm talking about. Look, me and that ghost can make a living arrangement and everything. I don't care. Like, if you can buy a house someone died in, that is real estate gold. Because most of the time, by the time people find out, like, someone was killed in this house or died in the house, it's like nobody's going to want to buy it. But here's the thing you also got to remember is that if you buy an old house, chances are somebody's already died in the house. That's the thing. But the ghosts in New Orleans go together like bees and Mardi Gras, considered by many hunters to be the most supernatural city in the U.S. And believers agree that New Orleans teems with restless spirits. And there were many enslaved Africans practicing in voodoo arts, where atrocities were committed in the famous Lake LeBarn mansion, and where secret brothels and hidden haunted spaces abound. Now, the city's many famous ghost tours and the bloody steps to infamous crimes indict delve into the eerie cemeteries and the New Orleans, the moniker city of the dead. It goes without saying that the bars are haunted too, which makes the haunted pub crawl a spine tingling option. Or maybe the hotel you're staying at could be haunted too. It's haunted too. And here sometimes the walls do talk. This is what keeps drawing me to New Orleans. Yes, I'm that weird freak. You can go on and say it. But yeah, let's talk about New Orleans and vampires. Oh my gosh. But vampires toward the history of New Orleans that resurfaced when Anne Rice, the New Orleans-born Dawn of dark vampire fiction, wrote her Interview with a Vampire series in the 1980s. In the popular books, hordes of fans and mills outside the possibly haunted Green District abode on the first street and peek around other places for vampires, resting places. Rice moved to California in 2004, but you can still find signed copies of her book at the Garden District Bookshop, where she once arrived at a friend's signing and ferried in a horse-drawn horse. And there's a boutique called Boutique de Vampire in the French Quarter, which claims to be the only vampire shop in the country, only to open to be both Merles and vampires since 2003. They offer tours, coffin-shaped backpacks, and Kate's, and the usual. See, another place that's going to be on my bucket list if I ever make it to New Orleans. I've got to make it to New Orleans. Now let's talk about what New Orleans is really truly famous for. If you've guessed food, then you are correct. Um, Synonymous with New Orleans, voodoo first came to Louisiana with enslaved West Africans who merged the religious rituals and practices of those of the local Catholic population. New Orleans voodoo is also known as voodoo Catholicism. It is a religion connected to nature, spirits, and ancestors. It was bolstered when followers fleeing color made its practice into an important part of the culture. Voodoo queens and kings were spiritual and political figures in the 1800s in New Orleans. Now, the core of New Orleans voodoo is one that God does not interfere in the daily lives, but the spirits do. Connection with these spirits were attained through various rituals such as dance, music, chanting, and snakes. Today, gris dolls, potions, and talisman are still found in stores' homes throughout the city, a reminder of New Orleans' fascination with spirits, magic, and mystery. Voodoo practices include readings, spiritual baths, prayer, and personal ceremonies. It is used to cure anxiety, addictions, and feelings of depression and loneliness, as well as to help the poor, hungry, and the sick. Now, what are some great voodoo places in New Orleans? Well, there's Congo Square, which is located in Armstrong Park in the Treem neighborhood in Congo Square served as a gathering place for enslaved Africans, and it was the place reserved for African tradition and expressions of culture. Hundreds of people would gather from form drum circles and spiritual ceremonies, and the area remains open today and continues to host cultural meetings. Now let's talk about some famous personalities and practitioners. I'm gonna go ahead and clarify one thing. I'm not big into the whole voodoo setting, but I have an interest in it and I'm very open minded to it. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying. But yeah. But the most famous is Marie LeVay. She was the and sh Marie LeVay was a legendary practitioner buried in St. Louis Cemetery. And she was a devout Catholic and attended Mass at St. Louis Cathedral. And she encouraged others to do as well. And she lived in the French Quarters on St. Anne Street, where many people stopped to ask for her help in hours of the day and night. She was a free woman of color who adopted children, fed the hungry, and nursed the sick during the yellow fever epidemic. She was known to help um, enslaved servants and their escapees, and it's said that politicians, lawyers, and businessmen consulted her before making any financial or business related decisions. Her home was adorned with candles, images of saints, altars, and items that protect the home from spirits. You can find nickels, paper flowers, and various offerings on the tomb today. Now, you can actually stay at the inn on Saint Anne in the Marie Laver Annex in the Creole College that she actually owned. Another example of the voodoo is Dr. John. And he was perhaps one of the most famous voodoo kings of New Orleans when Dr. John, also known as Bayou John, he was born in Senegal and he was kidnapped as a slave and brought to Cuba. He eventually moved to New Orleans as a cotton roller, where he became a part of a local voodoo community, and he brought property on the Bayou and became known as an excellent healer to the voodoo and fortune tellers. He was the teacher of Marie Levay, um, and a famous voodoo celebration is the St. John's Eve. And St. John's Eve is celebrated on June 23rd around the world for the summer solstice. And the holiday has a special celebration in New Orleans each year, as it began in the 1830s by Marie LeVay, owned by St. John. A head washing ritual was combined with a public party. A celebration of, so sick of spam callers. It was a celebration um, that of the International House Hotel has been since adopted, and you can also return to the Bayou St. John to participate in the ritual each year as well. Like how does this stuff not intrigue you? Like city has so much history with it. And this course we all know is known for the voodoo, like anybody with a brain can tell, right? But today voodoo remains to practice and serve the others to influence life and the connection of ancestors. Rituals are usually held privately, but there are various places that will give you a reading and assist in a ritual. The Voodoo Spiritual Temple in New Orleans, only formally established voodoo temple located across the street from the Congo Square. Now, the New Orleans Historic Museum is a great shop in the French Quarter to learn about the voodoo history in New Orleans. You can learn about the rituals, voodoo altars, and artifacts from Africa, Haiti, and New Orleans. You can take an educated tour about voodoo in New Orleans from the Haunted History Tours, Island of Algiers tours, and the free tours by foot. Now, there are several voodoo shops that you can still be found in the city, such as the Voodoo Authentica, Island of Salvation, Botanica, and of course, Marie LeVay's House of Voodoo. You can shop for products or you can get personal readings. Now, if you're one of those you want to just like, okay, so I remember back in Hansville they opened like this what's the word I'm looking for? It's not an antiquity shop. It's like a alternative shop, you might want to say. Anyway, it was like it has stuff like this, but it didn't last long because if you know Huntsville, Alabama is a very small town and everything, so you've got to be considerate. Like it wasn't just Huntsville was not ready to have this shop. That's the thing. Um, but it's just it takes a special person, a special talent to have it, and New Orleans is a prime example of this. But here's the thing: when it comes to voodoo shopping in New Orleans, it is not a lost art in the city, and you can find items like house blessing spray, away all evil spirits, furniture cleaner, and the local corner groceries. Voodoo, with any litany and spells, gris candles and charms, is a mixture of traditional African spiritual beliefs fused with the aspects of Catholicism and the French Creole culture. Um, and now, brought to New Orleans by it was brought to New Orleans by the enslaved Africans from West Africa in the 1700s, and the practice of voodoo was a zenith in the 1830s. And during the reign of celebrated priestess Marie Laveau, whose whose life is the stuff of legend, and her remains live on St. Louis Cemetery. And a handful of voodoo shops and temples dot the French Quarter in it. Now let's talk about something else besides voodoo, because you're probably wondering how many times is she gonna mention this? Well, let's talk about some haunted tours that are in New Orleans. Um, yeah, I think New Orleans has over 300 years of history and mystery, and here are some places that you can explore. First is the cemetery tours. Then there's that you can do, and that includes the St. Louis Cemetery, and New Orleans is a city that's surrounded by water and built on below sea level. And this is why the departed will spend eternity entombed above ground. Here are the graves of family affairs in which remain setting over the times to make room for the next generation to move to what we call the cities of the dead. It is ornate and historic and funky. Um, in other words, like New Orleans cemeteries are a home to everyone from music hit makers to voodoo queens. And the tour companies real tour will show you um, who's who and explain the history and tradition. You can pay homage to the fallen yellow fever victims in St. Louis on Main Street, in the city's oldest boneyard, or visit some of the newer, just as elaborate places. So, buying the dead, burying the dead in a place built below sea level was a problem that faced the earliest residents in the French settlement, and that became New Orleans. The solution that was agreed upon was to entomb the departed in elaborate marble chambers and above ground, created one of the city's most lingering attractions. Um, but you wonder what was the purported resting places of the Voodoo Queen? Marie Laveau, musician Al Hurt, and Civil War General PGT Beauregard. Well, all the residents in New is what is now New Orleans is known as City of the Dead. And you can take some of these guided tours I'm going to tell you about. Some of the most haunted places are Muriel Jackson Square, which is after losing the house to a poker game. Pierre Antoine Leparty Jourdan committed suicide upstairs in 1814. His ghost doesn't appear human, but as a glimmer of sparkly light, and there is even seen a seance room that guests can visit the honors of Jordan's spirit. Um, Next is the Le Petit Theater, and here you might find a bump into an actress. But here you can bump into an actress in from the 1930s whose name was Caroline, who accidentally tumbled over a railing to her death into the courtyard below. Dressed in a white wedding gown for the play that night. You might also run into the captain who watches the plays from the balcony seat, hoping for a glimpse of an actress he was sweet on. Next, we have the Père Antoine's Alley, Swan's Alley. And Pierre Antoine was a beloved priest who worked tirelessly for the poor and visitors to the alley that ran alongside the St. Louis Cathedral. So, say you can see him. Some say you can actually see his ghost in the early mornings. In the early mornings. Next is the site of the old French Opera House, and this site is said to be haunted by a Marguerite, the ghost of an aging Storyville madam. Spurned by her young lover, she committed suicide more than 100 years ago after leaving a note that says, I will return and kill those that have hurt me. Next, you could probably have it. If I didn't say it before, I'm saying it now. Faulkner House Books. That's right. William Faulkner wrote his first novel while staying at the house in 1920s, and people swear that they've seen his ghost sitting there writing at a writing desk and say that you can smell his pipe. Next is the Ursuline convent, and in the 1700s, the Catholics disease sent young girls from the French convents to New Orleans to find husbands, and they carried their belongings in coffin-shaped chests, and that was known as the casket girls. And some say that the caskets really held vampires from an old country. Next is the St. Louis Cathedral, and it is believed to be haunted by Père Dagobert, who was a pastor there in the mid 1700s, and after worship, people would have seen his spirit walking with his head lowered and down the aisles. Next is the old Abyssine House, and this is 200-year-old bar. It's haunted by a famous customer who used to invite here. And you might pull up to a stool and sit next to this guy, General Andrew Jackson. Time, you guys, if you guys haven't realized, I hate Andrew Jackson. I know that's probably gonna get me canceled or whatever by people, but I don't care. Like, literally, like, I remember in my Tennessee history class, we literally had this debate about Andrew Jackson. Almost all the girls hated him. There was a few guys who were actually loved, and there was like, the guys loved him, but all the girls hated him. The guy was a douchebag. I'm sorry, like, you do not, like, I could talk about him, I could give like an entire episode on him all day, but back to the episode, shall we? But Voodoo Creek Marie LaVey and pirate John Lafferty. And doors open and close on their own while bottles, glasses, and chairs have been seen moving around the bar. Um, the Bourbon Erlands is also another place you can go, and it's famous for its quadron balls. And today, a lonely ghost can be seen dancing beneath a crystal chandelier. And the hotel is also home to a ghost nun who slapped a man working on the stairwell for swearing. Okay, this is also now going on my list of places to like visit if I ever make it to NOLA. Yeah. Yes, I'm that weird person. We can all go ahead and say it. But yeah, and next is Antoine's restaurant. And it's said that Antoine Alcataire Alcacer is the founder of the famous family-owned restaurant and returns to check his ancestors. Other spirits in 19th century clothing peer from mirrors in the washroom. Next is Harmon Grandma House, and it was built in 1831 for prosperous Creoles. And I've been told, like, There is like a huge like rivalry with Creoles, like with the Creoles in Louisiana. But anyway, the house is said to be alive with friendly southern ghosts who scatter scented roses and lavender around the rooms and light in the fireplaces to make it cozy. Next we have Napoleon House. This now eatery bar has been a few different roles since it was built in around 1800, which have been led by a variety of different specters haunting the site. Because it served as a hospital during the Civil War, because their Confederate soldiers can be spotted walking into the second floor balcony, and other ghostly phenomena also are in the 20th century, in the figure of an old lady sweeping the balcony and mysteriously reappearance of glasses at the bar. Everything has been cleaned and put away at that night. Next, we have Marie LaVey's house, which talked about this. Then we have the Hotel Montelon. And a stay at the Hotel Montelon comes with a dose of haunted history. Legend has it its 14th floor, actually the 13th floor, of the hotel is home to some paranormal activity. Guests have reported hearing the footsteps of Maurice Begard, a young ghost of a child who haunts the hotel. Next is Sultan's Place in the Gaudet La Paris house, which is also known as Sultan's Palace, and it was leased by the brothers of the Turkish Sultan in the late 1790s. And one stormy night, assassins brutally murdered everyone they found in the house. Ghostly forms have found there for many years. Next, we have this guy again. Oh, even though he's not from Louisiana, I really hate this guy. Like, the fact that the donkey was originally meant as a joke for him, he took it and ran with it. I respect that. But I still don't like the guy. He was a douchebag. Like, oh my gosh. Um, okay. Not allowing my hatred for him to come back. But the Andrew Jackson Hotel and the ghost of the Andrew Jackson Hotel are some of the most interactive specters in the city. Back during the building tenures of boys' boarding school, 5 students died in a fire, but they also spent their afterlives playing and causing a bit of childlike mischief. And their laughter and footsteps is often heard throughout the hotel and courtyard. The spirits of the boys are also believed to be a former housekeeper and will move personal items and furniture around in the guest rooms, and the boys hiding them as a joke, and the housekeeper fluffing pillows and straightening them. Next, we have Napoleon's house. And long before New Orleans earned its moniker for being Big Easy, and before the French claimed the land, indigenous people called the area Balbancha, which means basically land of many tongues. In New Orleans or Balbancha evolved from centuries of accumulating diverse cultures and developing a unique and powerful allure. For as many, but For as many good times as the city had, the land was witness to equal amount, if not more, horrors, including colonization, slavery, wars, and natural disasters. Throughout it all, New Orleans endures legacy of bizarre and often unexplainable occurrence, sprouted myths and legends that carry on with a myths that people can still feel today. There have been several film, media, and literature tourisms that continue to capitalize on this. Now, let's talk about some myths and legends that come from some like urban legends from New Orleans. These are my personal favorite because I love a good urban legend. I don't know about y'all, but like urban legends to me are amazing. But the first is the Vampires of the French Quarter is perhaps the best known urban legend in New Orleans, and many locals believe that the existence of parasitic night walkers. The city is even home to an organization of self-identifying vampires, the New Orleans Vampire Association. Tales of the vampires are vast and date back to centuries before Anne Rice penned her best-selling Gothic novel and interviews with the vampires. Next, we have the Carter brothers, and this is one of these tales that about two dock working brothers from 1930s. And with John Wayne Carter. And as the story goes, the brothers were vampires who spent their nights roaming the streets for victims. Eventually, they were arrested and executed. While no legal records support the story, some believe the tale is true and the brothers are still very much undead. Next is the Count of Saint Germain, and rumors of vampires are countless in New Orleans, but the most infamous vampire legend of the mysterious case of Jacques de Saint Germain, also known as the Count of Saint Germain, and the Count was reportedly born sometime between 1600s and early 1700s. Reappeared in New Orleans as Jacques Saint Germain during the 1900s, and he passed himself off as a descendant of the original Count of Saint Germain. And he quickly began the toast of New Orleans. A young woman who reportedly told the police that Germain was a vampire and had attacked her. The police went to the Germain home and questioned him about the allegations, and Germain explained to the police that the young woman was intoxicated. Nevertheless, the police asked him to visit the station the next morning for a formal statement. He never arrived and vanished in the night without a trace. Numerous sightings of the peculiar man, known as Jack, have occurred throughout the years and to this present day. And there are those who believe the strange man named Jack is the Count of Saint Germain looking for his next victim. Next, we have the Casket Girls. And the Casket Girls were pale from the journey, arrived in New Orleans in 1728, and the young women became known as the Felice a la Cassette for the casket-shaped coffer chest, and they were with the sisters of Ursuline Convent until finding marriage. However, the Casket Girls were viewed as outcasts, and due to their mistreatment, the French officials decided they should return to France. And the sisters of Ursuline's convent went to find the girls to help them pack their coffer chest, but the girls, along with their possessions, had vanished, and all that was left them was an empty coffer chest. Following the Casket Girls' sudden disappearance, they faced accusations of being vampires. From time to time, and especially the foggy nights, visitors of the French Quarter had witnessed pale-looking young women lurking around um Old Ursuline Convent, as they were once called. Next, we have the Ghost of St. Louis Cemetery, number one. And New Orleans is known for the cities of the dead, for its many above-ground burial sites. The cemetery was established in 1789. It's the oldest extant cemetery in the city, and it is reported home by many ghosts. Next, we have Henry Vinge. He was a wayward sailor who was staying at a boarding school in New Orleans, awaiting shifts, and he had led to his name at a tomb formation. While Burgess was at sea, they also the crooked owner also of the boarding school sold the tomb. And according to legend, he still wanders the cemetery looking for his family's tombs. You can also stay at the Maison du Port Hotel, which is one of the best ways to discover the haunting tales of New Orleans by staying at the hotel in the middle of it all. It is ideally situated in the heart of the French Quarter, and to make a reservation at the Maison du Port Hotel, you can. Like, see, I love New Orleans. This is why, I want to visit New Orleans. Like, so much history here, and I'm a history nerd in general. But just thinking about, all the places and the haunted history behind it. But what is some of the most famous places you would recommend going to New Orleans? Let me